It had been 8 years since I last saw my brother. 8 years of silence, distance, and excuses that piled up like dust on an old photograph. After our parents passed, we promised we'd stay close, that we'd never let life tear us apart. But life, as I learned, doesn't always need your permission to do exactly that. I don't know what finally pushed me to call him. Maybe it was the way the house felt too quiet lately. Maybe it was the loneliness that seeps in when you start realizing that family is something fragile, that if you don't hold on, it fades. Whatever it was, one morning I picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Ethan?" I said when he answered. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, and then a laugh, warm, startled, familiar. "Jake? You're kidding me! After all these years?" His voice hit me like sunlight after a long winter. We talked for nearly an hour, both pretending we hadn't noticed the time slipping away. When I told him I was planning to visit, I could almost hear him smiling through the line. "You serious?" he asked. "Man, you have no idea how long I've waited for this. I can't wait for you to meet my family, Sarah, our little boy, even my mother-in-law's living with us now. They all know about you." Those words hit deep. They all know about you. It made me realize how far apart our lives had drifted, his filled with laughter, routine, and people who loved him, mine, quieter, lonelier. I had no one waiting for me at home, just the echo of my own thoughts. That night I couldn't sleep. I packed my bag before sunrise, took the first bus heading west, and watched the world roll by through dirty glass. The farther I got from the city, the lighter I felt. Maybe I was running from something, or maybe I was just trying to go back to when things were simpler, before time and regret made everything complicated. The trip was long. I switched buses in Oklahoma City, then again in Amarillo. By the time I reached the small town of Willow Creek, my body felt like it had been rearranged by exhaustion. But my heart was alive with anticipation. I called Ethan from the station. "You made it?" he asked, breathless. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I'm finally here." He offered to pick me up, but I told him not to bother. I had his address written down, and I wanted to see the town for myself, to breathe its air, to feel the place he now called home. But first, I needed coffee. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since dawn. There was a small diner across the street from the bus station, one of those quiet, time-worn places that smelled of coffee and fried eggs, the kind where locals come to talk about the weather and the world passing them by. I stepped inside, found a booth by the window, and ordered the simplest breakfast I could think of. As I waited, I looked around. The walls were lined with faded photographs, farmers, small-town parades, the high school football team. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone else. For a moment, I wondered what it would feel like to belong somewhere again. The waitress brought my coffee and I thanked her. The cup was chipped, the spoon slightly bent, but the smell alone made me sigh. I watched the steam rise and thought about my brother. Would we still understand each other after all this time? Would it feel the same? Or would we just sit there pretending the past hadn't changed us? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I missed him, and that I was ready to make peace with whatever ghosts had been keeping me away. Outside, the sun began to rise higher, casting golden light across the street. I finished my coffee, left a few bills on the table, and stepped back into the warmth of the morning. The taxi stand was just a few steps away. As the cab pulled away, I leaned my head against the window, watching as the diner disappeared in the rearview mirror. I didn't know that just a few hours later, I'd be back there, or that the woman I was about to meet behind that same counter would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and temptation. At that moment, I was only thinking about Ethan, about the boy who used to chase fireflies with me in the summer, who swore we'd never drift apart. When the cab turned down a narrow road lined with oak trees, I saw a house at the end of it. White fence, children's toys scattered across the lawn, a porch swing moving softly in the wind. My brother was there, standing on the porch, waving before the car even stopped. And suddenly, I felt that old ache in my chest, the one that comes when you realize that time has moved on without you. He looked older, heavier, his hair thinner, but his smile was the same. I stepped out of the cab, and before I could say a word, he wrapped his arms around me. "Damn, Jake," he whispered. "It's really you." And in that moment, it felt like nothing had changed, like 8 years of distance had folded into a single heartbeat. What I didn't know was that this reunion, this fragile return to family, was the first step into a storm I never saw coming. Because sometimes blood brings you home, and sometimes it leads you straight to temptation. The next morning felt lighter than it should have. I woke up before dawn, showered in the cheap motel room near the station, and stared at my reflection for longer than necessary. There was a strange mixture of exhaustion and excitement in my face. 8 years of absence, a cross-country trip, and now just one last ride to my brother's home. But first, coffee. The air outside was still cool, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and distant fields. I crossed the quiet street toward the diner I'd noticed the night before. Its faded sign read June's Place, the kind of small-town café where time seemed to move slower. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped in. Inside, everything was bathed in a soft amber glow, the hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, the faint hiss of the coffee machine. A few old men sat by the window, talking in low voices, and a young couple laughed quietly over pancakes. It was the kind of ordinary morning that felt sacred in its simplicity. Then I saw her. She was standing behind the counter, wiping down a row of cups with a white cloth. I don't know what it was about her that caught me so suddenly. Maybe it was her hair, dark, straight, falling effortlessly down her shoulders. Or maybe it was her eyes, a deep brown that held a spark of something curious, something alive. She looked up just as I was about to look away, and for a second, our eyes met. I forgot what I came in for. She smiled, softly, almost shyly, and in that small gesture, something inside me shifted. There are people you meet who simply exist, and then there are the rare ones who seem to pull the air toward them, who change the gravity of the room without saying a word. She was that kind. I sat at the counter, trying not to stare. She came closer, her apron slightly wrinkled, a pencil tucked behind her ear. "What can I get you this morning?" she asked. Her voice was calm, warm, like the hum of a familiar song. "Coffee," I said quickly, "and, maybe a breakfast sandwich if you've got one." She nodded, wrote it down, and smiled again. "Coming right up." I watched her walk away, feeling like an idiot. I hadn't felt that kind of nervousness in years. It was ridiculous. I was a grown man, sitting in a small-town diner, falling apart over a woman I didn't even know. When she returned with the coffee, she placed the cup gently in front of me. "You're not from around here, are you?" I laughed softly. "That obvious?" "Pretty much," she said, tilting her head. "You've got that look, someone who's lost but pretending not to be." I grinned. "Fair enough. I'm just passing through. Came to visit my brother." "Nice," she said. "Where's he live?" "Not far from here, Willow Creek." Her eyes flickered with recognition. "Oh, I know that area. Quiet little place. Good folks." We talked like that for a while. Nothing deep, nothing dangerous. Just two strangers sharing small talk over coffee. But beneath the surface, there was something else moving between us. A quiet electricity, a pull that neither of us seemed able or willing to ignore. "What's your name?" I asked finally. "Miriam," she said. "And you?" "Jake." "Nice to meet you, Jake." The way she said my name, slow, deliberate, made my chest tighten. It had been a long time since I'd felt that kind of attention. the kind that makes you feel seen. I tried to focus on my food, but my appetite was gone. She was all I could see. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The small laugh she tried to hide when I said something clumsy. Everything about her felt familiar and brand new at once. When I finished my sandwich, I hesitated. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want that quiet connection to fade back into the noise of the day. So, I said, trying to sound casual, if someone wanted to see more of this town, where would they go? She looked up from the coffee pot and smiled knowingly. You mean, if you wanted to see more of it? I chuckled. Maybe. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Well, I don't usually give tours, but I could make an exception. My pulse quickened. Really? Maybe, she said again, teasing. Then she looked around to make sure no one was listening and whispered, I get my lunch break in about an hour. There's a little park by the river. Quiet, nice view. If you're still around, maybe we could talk there, but I can't stay long. For a moment, I just looked at her, caught between reason and temptation. Every part of me wanted to say yes, to sit by that river, listen to her talk, watch the sunlight dance on her skin. But then I remembered Ethan, my brother waiting for me, probably checking the clock, wondering where I was. I swallowed hard. I'd love to, but I can't. My brother's expecting me. He took time off work just to see me. Something in her expression softened. She nodded slowly. That's sweet. He's lucky to have you. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Maybe next time? She hesitated, then nodded again. Yeah, next time. When I stood to leave, she wiped her hands on her apron and met my gaze one last time. Have a good day, Jake. You too, Miriam. As I stepped outside, the bell above the door chimed again. The morning light felt different now, brighter, sharper, filled with something I couldn't quite name. I walked toward the waiting cab, but my thoughts stayed behind, trapped in that diner, in her eyes, in the unspoken promise of what might have been. By the time the car pulled onto the open road, I caught myself smiling like a fool. I didn't know her story or what she carried inside her heart, but something about her felt inevitable, like she was meant to cross my path, even if just for a moment. And I had no idea that this moment, this simple, fleeting encounter, would be the beginning of everything I was never supposed to feel. I told myself I wouldn't go back to that diner. I told myself it was just a fleeting encounter, a pretty face, a moment of connection, a spark that didn't mean anything. I'd come here to see my brother, not to get distracted by a stranger with eyes that could drown a man. But that's the thing about attraction. It's not logical, and it's rarely polite. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of June's place again, pretending it was only for the coffee. Maybe I was just curious to see if she remembered me. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice one more time before leaving for Ethan's house. When I stepped inside, the smell of roasted beans and warm bread wrapped around me like a memory. The same low hum of morning conversations filled the air. And there she was, Miriam. She was behind the counter, arranging slices of pie in the display case, her hair pulled into a loose braid that somehow made her even more beautiful. When she saw me, her lips curved into a smile so genuine, it felt like the whole place brightened. Well, she said, resting her hands on the counter. Look who decided to come back. I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. Guess I couldn't stay away from your coffee. Her eyes sparkled. Right, I'm sure that's the only reason. We both laughed, softly, awkwardly, but it felt good. Real. She poured me a cup without asking, and when she slid it toward me, her fingers brushed mine for half a second. It was nothing, but it was everything. How's your brother? She asked, leaning slightly closer. I'm on my way to see him, I said. Haven't been home in years. Years, she repeated, her brow furrowing. That's a long time to be away. Yeah, I said, looking into my cup. Too long. Something about the way she looked at me told me she understood. Maybe not the details, but the ache of distance, the weight of lost time. We talked again, just like the day before, about small things, the town, the weather, her job, my trip. But beneath our words, there was tension, an invisible thread pulling tighter each time our eyes met. At one point, she leaned closer and whispered, "You know, you don't talk like the people around here. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" She tilted her head, pretending to think. Maybe both. The silence that followed was the kind that buzzes, not empty, but full of what neither of us dared to say. Then, just as I was about to ask for the check, she looked around the room. The other waitress was in the back. A few customers were paying at the register. Miriam's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I get my lunch break in about an hour," she said, her tone light, but her eyes serious. "There's a small park by the river, maybe 10 minutes from here. Quiet place. I like to go there when I need air." I blinked, not sure if I'd heard her right. "You're inviting me?" She smiled, a small, dangerous smile. "Maybe. Depends if you'll still be around." For a second, the whole world seemed to pause. Her voice, her eyes, the faint smell of coffee and sugar, it all blended into something intoxicating. "I'd like that," I said quietly. But even as I said it, a flash of guilt flickered in me. My brother was waiting. He'd taken time off work, probably pacing his living room right now, checking his phone for a call that wasn't coming. Still, the thought of sitting by that river with her tugged at me like gravity. "You sure you have time?" I asked, half hoping she'd give me a reason to walk away. "I'll make time," she said. 30 minutes, that's all I've got." 30 minutes, half an hour. Enough time to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I hesitated, trying to think of something smart to say, something to cool the fire that was starting to build between us. But before I could speak, she glanced at the clock, then back at me, her expression suddenly softer. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "If you're in a hurry, forget I said anything." That should have made it easier, but it didn't. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. Every part of me screamed to stay, to take that risk, to feel something alive again. But somewhere deep inside, another voice, quieter, older, wiser, was telling me not to. I sighed. "I'd really like to, Miriam. But my brother, he's waiting. He left work early just to see me." Her smile faltered for a split second before she forced it back. "Right, of course. Family first." I tried to read her expression, but it was unreadable. Somewhere between disappointment and understanding. "Maybe another time," I offered weakly. "Maybe," she echoed, her tone distant now. When I stood up, she didn't meet my eyes at first. She was pretending to wipe the counter, pretending the moment hadn't happened. Then, just as I reached the door, she called out softly, "Jake?" I turned. She was smiling again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "You never know. Maybe some moments are meant to wait." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and stepped outside. The sunlight was too bright. The world too ordinary after what had just happened. As I walked toward the taxi stand, I could still feel her gaze on me, like a touch I couldn't shake off. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. If I had stayed, if I had waited just one more hour, I wouldn't have been able to stop myself. Some temptations come dressed as kindness. Others smile at you from behind a counter and offer you 30 minutes by the river. Both can ruin a man if he lets them. By the time the cab turned down the quiet gravel road toward my brother's house, the afternoon sun had melted into a golden haze. I rolled down the window, and breathed in the dry air, filled with the scent of dust, pine, and something that reminded me faintly of home. It had been 8 years since I'd last seen Ethan. 8 years since we'd hugged, laughed, or even looked each other in the eyes. Life had pulled us in different directions: work, distance, grief, all those invisible walls that build up when you're not paying attention. But as soon as I saw him standing on the porch, waving, all of that disappeared. He looked older, broader in the shoulders, but softer around the edges. His hairline had started to retreat, and there were deep lines around his mouth, the kind that only come from years of responsibility and quiet exhaustion. But when he smiled, it was the same boyish grin I remembered from our childhood, the one that used to make everything feel okay. I barely had time to close the taxi door before he pulled me into a hug. "Damn, Jake," he said, his voice catching. "You actually came." "Yeah," I laughed, clapping him on the back. "Took me long enough, huh?" He stepped back, eyes glistening. "Man, you look good, older, but good." "Right back at you," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. There was something tired in his eyes. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of quiet weariness that comes from holding a family together. He helped me carry my bag inside, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, I was hit with the warmth of a real home. The living room was filled with framed photos: his wedding, a little boy's first birthday, Christmas mornings. The air smelled like coffee, laundry soap, and something cooking in the kitchen. A small voice called out, "Daddy?" Ethan turned and smiled as a boy ran into the room, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with curly brown hair and a face that was pure sunshine. "Jake," Ethan said proudly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Noah, my son." I crouched down, smiling. "Hey there, Noah. I'm your Uncle Jake." The boy grinned shyly, hiding half behind his father's leg. "Dad says you used to get in trouble a lot." Ethan burst out laughing. "Oh, he did, trust me," I smiled. "Your dad's not wrong." It was strange looking at this little boy, a living reminder of how much time had passed, of all the moments I'd missed. I wondered what kind of uncle I might have been if I hadn't stayed away so long. We spent the afternoon catching up. Ethan poured me a drink and we sat on the porch, talking like no time had passed. He told me about his job at the local lumber yard, about the new house, about the quiet life he'd built. I told him about my work, my city apartment, the way the silence felt different when there was no one waiting for you at home. Somewhere in the middle of our conversation, I noticed how happy he sounded when he spoke about his wife. "You'll meet Sarah soon," he said, grinning. "She's at work right now, but she's been dying to meet you. She's heard all the stories." "I can only imagine which ones," I joked, taking a sip of beer. He laughed. "The good ones, mostly." We sat there watching Noah chase a ball across the yard while Ethan told me how he'd met his wife, how she'd changed everything for him. There was pride in his voice when he spoke her name, and it made me glad for him, genuinely glad. He'd built something steady, something I never managed to hold on to. By late afternoon, the golden light was fading into dusk. The sound of cicadas began to rise, filling the quiet air. Ethan's mother-in-law, a kind gray-haired woman named Linda, called us in for dinner. She greeted me warmly, insisting on hugging me before I could even introduce myself. "So you're the famous brother," she said with a laugh. "Ethan never stops talking about you." Dinner was simple but delicious. Roasted chicken, corn, mashed potatoes. The kind of food that makes you feel human again. We ate, laughed, told stories from our childhood, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something like peace settling inside me. When the dishes were cleared and Noah had gone to bed, we sat in the living room talking. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smiling at me through half-closed eyes. "Man, it's really good to have you here. You don't know how much I've missed this." "Me too," I said softly, and I meant it. But as the evening stretched on, an odd restlessness began to creep in, like a faint hum beneath the surface of everything. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the fatigue from traveling. Around 5:30, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Then voices, laughter, footsteps. Ethan straightened up, his face lighting with anticipation. "That must be her," he said, already standing. "She's home." Something in his tone, the excitement, the affection, made me smile. I was genuinely happy for him. I'd get to finally meet the woman who made my brother's life complete. From where I sat, I could hear her voice in the kitchen. Soft, melodic, familiar somehow, though I couldn't place why. Ethan was already calling out to her, "Honey, come meet my brother." And then I saw her. She stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes as deep and haunting as the memory that had been following me since that morning. My heart stopped. The world fell silent. Standing there, in my brother's living room, smiling politely as if nothing in the universe had shifted, was her. Miriam, the girl behind the counter, the woman who had smiled at me with that same dangerous softness, Ethan's wife. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt the air leave my lungs as her eyes met mine, wide with shock and disbelief. Time fractured around us, 8 years apart, one coincidence too cruel to be real. "Jake," Ethan said proudly, oblivious to the storm between us. "This is Sarah, my wife." And in that instant, I realized that some reunions don't just heal old wounds. Some open new ones that can never, ever close. For a moment, everything inside me stopped. Sound, thought, even the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. It was as if time itself had been caught between two breaths. She stood there in the doorway, one hand still holding the edge of the kitchen wall, her eyes wide, lips slightly parted. Her name, Sarah, lingered in the air like smoke, but my mind couldn't process it. To me, she wasn't Sarah. She was Miriam, the woman from the diner, the woman whose smile had kept me awake on the bus, whose voice had followed me through miles of open road. And now, she was my brother's wife. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Every muscle in my body tensed, as though bracing for a collision I couldn't avoid. Ethan's voice sounded far away, muffled, like he was speaking from underwater. "Jake, this is my wife, Sarah," he said again, turning to her with a proud smile. "Honey, this is my brother I told you about, the one from Denver." Sarah's eyes darted between us, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and panic. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if words had suddenly become dangerous. "Hi," she managed finally, her voice trembling just enough for me to notice. "Hi," I echoed, forcing a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. For a few unbearable seconds, the room was silent. Ethan didn't notice the tension. He was too busy laughing, talking, trying to make the introduction warm and easy. "You see?" he said, putting an arm around her. "I told you he'd finally make it here. Took him 8 years, but he made it." She nodded weakly. "Yeah, that's wonderful." Her hand brushed her hair behind her ear, a familiar delicate motion that made my chest tighten. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen her, hadn't recognized her. But it was impossible. The image of her standing behind that diner counter, smiling at me like I was the only man in the world, burned too vividly in my mind. Ethan gestured for her to come closer. "Come on, sit with us for a minute." She hesitated. I could see the hesitation in the way her feet shifted, the way her fingers clutched the towel still in her hands. But she did what any good wife would do. She smiled for her husband, walked across the room, and sat down beside him. I could barely breathe. Ethan started telling her about my trip, about how long I'd been on the road, about the childhood stories we'd just finished sharing. His words faded in and out like static. I could hear him talking, but I couldn't focus, because she was there, inches away from me, pretending, just like I was. Every now and then, her eyes flicked toward me, quick, nervous glances that said everything words couldn't. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. I wondered if Ethan could feel the tension in the air, if he could sense that something was off. But he just kept talking, completely at ease, completely unaware that his entire world was balanced on a secret neither of us dared to speak. After a while, he excused himself to check on Noah, who had been playing outside. As soon as he left the room, the air between us changed. It thickened, heavy, electric, full of guilt and memory. Sarah stood up quickly, her hands trembling slightly. I should check on dinner, she said, but her voice cracked halfway through. I swallowed hard. Sarah, she froze, her back still to me. Don't, she whispered. I didn't know, I said quietly. God, I swear, I didn't know who you were. She turned slowly, her eyes wide and glassy. Neither did I. Her voice was barely more than a breath. You said your name was Jake. You never mentioned your brother. My throat went dry. If I had stayed, if I'd waited for you at the park. Don't, she said again, sharper this time. Her hands were clenched now, knuckles white. Don't even say it. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two strangers tied together by a mistake that hadn't even happened. But almost had. Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway, and in an instant, her face changed. She forced a smile, composed herself, and turned back toward the kitchen as if nothing had happened. When he came back, she was stirring a pot on the stove, humming softly, her back perfectly straight. Dinner that night was torture. We sat around the table, the four of us, Ethan, Sarah, his mother-in-law Linda, and me, pretending everything was normal. But every time Sarah reached for a dish or passed me something, our fingers almost touched, and the air between us sparked with silent tension. Ethan told stories. Linda laughed, Sarah smiled at all the right moments, and I played my part, nodding, smiling, laughing when I was supposed to. But underneath the table, my hands were shaking. After dinner, Ethan offered me a drink on the porch. Sarah said she'd clean up. I wanted to help, to offer something, but I knew I couldn't trust myself to stand that close to her again. We talked for hours, Ethan and I, about old times, about how proud he was of his family, about how grateful he felt for the life he'd built. And all the while, guilt was tearing through me like fire. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I could hear the faint sound of laughter from the next room, my brother's voice, her voice. I closed my eyes and saw her again, standing behind the counter at June's place, smiling, her eyes soft and inviting. And now, standing in the doorway of my brother's house, wearing his ring, carrying his name. That image would haunt me for the rest of the night, because no matter how hard I tried to forget, I knew what I had seen in her eyes: recognition, regret, and something far worse. The echo of the same desire that was slowly eating me alive. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was still, wrapped in that kind of quiet that only comes before the world remembers to breathe again. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the pale light creeping through the curtains, and tried to steady my thoughts. But no matter how many deep breaths I took, the memory of last night clung to me like smoke. Every detail of it, her face, her trembling voice, the fear in her eyes, played on repeat in my mind. The way she said "don't" echoed through me louder than the sound of my own heartbeat. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. I'd spent half the night staring at the ceiling, wondering how the universe could be cruel enough to orchestrate something like this. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I could smell coffee brewing. Ethan was already up. He always had been a morning person, disciplined, reliable, full of energy before the sun even rose. I, on the other hand, felt like a man who'd spent the night wrestling with ghosts. "Morning, brother," he said, cheerful as ever, holding out a mug. "You sleep all right?" "Yeah," I lied, taking the cup. He didn't notice the lie. He never did. Ethan had always seen the best in people, even when the truth was standing right in front of him. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, talking about the day ahead, how he was taking me to see the river, how Noah wanted to show me his fishing rod, how Sarah was planning something special for dinner. When he said her name, something twisted inside me. Sarah. I didn't look toward the hallway, but I could feel her there before I saw her. She walked in quietly, wearing a simple blue dress, her hair still damp from the shower. The moment our eyes met, everything inside me froze again. She gave me a small, polite smile, the kind you give to a stranger. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I answered, pretending the sound of her voice didn't make my chest tighten. Ethan looked between us, oblivious. "You two didn't get to talk much last night, huh?" Sarah's hand faltered on the coffee pot for just a fraction of a second. "No, not really," she said. "You two were catching up." "Yeah," I added quickly. "We had a lot of lost time to make up for." She nodded, eyes lowered, and poured herself a cup. When she sat down at the table, there was an invisible wall between us. Every glance, every breath felt dangerous. We didn't talk much that morning. We didn't have to. There was already too much being said in silence. Later, Ethan took me to the river, the same one she had mentioned that first day in the diner. The irony didn't escape me. The water was calm, glittering under the sun. We cast our lines and let the stillness stretch between us. "I'm really glad you came, Jake," he said after a while, his voice low and sincere. "I missed this. I missed us." "I missed it too," I said, and I meant it. God, I meant it more than he could ever know. He looked at me with that easy, open trust he'd always had. "Sarah's been excited for days, you know. She couldn't stop talking about how much she wanted you to feel at home here." My throat went dry. I stared at the ripples on the water, unable to meet his eyes. "Yeah," I muttered. She's very kind." If he noticed the tension in my voice, he didn't mention it. When we got back to the house that afternoon, she was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. The sound hit me like a memory, the same melody she'd been humming behind the counter when I first saw her. I stood there in the doorway, watching her for a moment too long. She turned, startled. Our eyes met, and for a second, everything else faded. The ticking clock, the rustle of the curtains, the distant sound of Ethan outside with Noah. It was just us. "You should be careful," she said in a low voice, not looking directly at me. "I didn't mean to stare," I replied. "That's not what I meant." Her words hung in the air between us. She set down the dish towel, her hands trembling slightly. "We can't let him see," she whispered. The sentence landed heavy, final, like a verdict neither of us had asked for. "I know," I said quietly. For a moment she looked at me, really looked at me, not as her husband's brother, not as the stranger from the diner, but as the man who had shared a dangerous truth with her. There was no accusation in her eyes, no blame, only fear. And beneath that, something that shouldn't have been there, understanding, maybe even longing. That was the moment the unspoken agreement formed between us, the silent pact. We would not speak of that day at the diner. We would not talk about the invitation, or the glances, or the spark that nearly became something more. We would pretend it had never happened. For Ethan's sake, for Noah's, for the fragile piece that held this family together. And so we smiled when we were supposed to smile. We spoke when silence might draw suspicion. We played our parts, perfectly rehearsed, perfectly false. That night during dinner, Ethan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Sarah joined in, her laughter soft and controlled, her eyes never meeting mine. I sat across from her, nodding, smiling, pretending everything was fine. But beneath the surface, something dark pulsed. Not desire anymore, not quite. It was guilt. Heavy, relentless, suffocating guilt. When I went to bed, I stared at the ceiling again, listening to the faint sound of her voice down the hall. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm of them, gentle, familiar, dangerous. And I realized then that silence can be louder than any confession, because silence doesn't erase what happened. It preserves it, perfectly, painfully, in the space between two people who can never speak it aloud. Days began to pass in a slow, unbearable rhythm, a routine painted over with polite smiles and unspoken truths. To anyone looking from the outside, it must have seemed like the picture of family harmony. My brother had his wife, his child, his home, his peace. And I, the visiting brother, had blended quietly into the background, another guest enjoying the comfort of belonging. But inside, I was rotting. The silence between Sarah and me had turned into something alive, something that breathed and moved in the space between every glance, every accidental brush of hands, every moment when Ethan wasn't looking. We both tried to ignore it, but it clung to us, heavy and relentless, like a shadow that refused to fade with the light. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the afternoon, when Ethan was out working on the shed or playing with Noah, I'd find myself alone in the kitchen. And she would appear, to refill a glass, to check the oven, to do something that didn't really need doing. We'd exchange small talk, short, harmless words that meant nothing on the surface but carried everything beneath. "How long will you stay?" she asked one afternoon, her voice low, cautious. "I haven't decided," I said, pretending to study the pattern on my coffee cup. She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. "Ethan likes having you here. It's been good for him." "And for you?" I asked before I could stop myself. She froze, her eyes lifting to mine. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I think we both know it's complicated." Her words hit harder than I expected. Complicated. That was one way to describe it. Another word might have been impossible. At night, I tried to distract myself, reading, listening to music, pretending to sleep. But sleep never came easily. The walls of that house felt too thin. From my room, I could hear everything. The creak of the hallway floor, the whisper of her footsteps, the faint murmur of her voice when she spoke to Ethan. It was torture, not because of what they did, but because of what I imagined. There's a cruelty in desire when it has no place to go. It doesn't fade, it transforms. It becomes a quiet madness, a storm you learn to hide behind calm eyes. One evening, I walked outside just to clear my head. The air was warm, thick with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I sat on the porch steps, watching the fireflies drift lazily across the yard. Somewhere inside, I could hear laughter, Ethan and Sarah putting Noah to bed. I wanted to be happy for them. I truly did. But every laugh, every gentle tone between them felt like another weight pressing against my chest. I kept asking myself why this was happening, why fate would lead me straight into the heart of a temptation I could never touch. When the laughter faded, the night fell into silence. I stayed outside longer than I should have, staring into the dark fields, listening to the whisper of the wind. And then I heard it, the soft creak of the door opening behind me. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, careful. I didn't turn right away. No. Too many thoughts. She stepped closer, her bare feet brushing lightly against the wooden floorboards. "You think too much, Jake." I gave a hollow laugh. "It's that or lose my mind." There was a pause. Then she said softly, "Maybe you already have." Her words hung between us, dangerous and delicate. When I finally looked at her, the porch light caught her face, half shadow, half glow. She looked tired, beautiful, haunted. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt electric, charged with all the things we hadn't said. "You should go inside," I whispered finally. "If Ethan wakes up—" "He won't," she interrupted. Her voice trembled just slightly. "He's a heavy sleeper." I swallowed hard. "Still, we shouldn't—" "I know," she said quickly. "But knowing doesn't make it easier." I looked away, gripping the edge of the step like it could anchor me to reason. The silence stretched on, heavy with everything we both wanted and couldn't have. Finally, she sighed and turned toward the door. "Good night, Jake." "Good night," I said, my voice barely audible. But she didn't go right away. She lingered for a second longer, her hand on the door frame, her gaze lost somewhere between guilt and longing. Then, without another word, she disappeared inside. I sat there for a long time after she left, the echo of her presence still lingering in the air. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like a betrayal of its own. The next morning, things went on as if nothing had happened. Breakfast, small talk, laughter around the table. Ethan kissed her cheek before heading out, completely unaware of the quiet chaos sitting across from him. But every time she looked at me, I saw it. The same ache reflected back, the same guilt twisting beneath her polite composure. We were both prisoners of the same sin, even though we hadn't acted on it. That afternoon, while Ethan and Noah were out fishing, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at one of their family photos on the mantel. In it, she was holding Noah, her smile radiant and free. I barely recognized her. The woman in that photo didn't look like the one haunted by what we both carried now. "Jake." Her voice came from behind me. I turned, startled. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "We can't keep doing this," she said softly. "I know," I said. "I've been trying to stop feeling it." Her eyes softened. "You can't stop what isn't yours to control." There was no anger in her tone, no blame, only sadness. The kind of sadness that comes from knowing that the heart doesn't always obey the rules it should. And in that moment, I understood. The weight of desire isn't just the wanting, it's the restraint, the endless, exhausting act of holding yourself back from what your soul already calls its own. That night, as I lay in bed, I could still hear the wind moving softly outside, like it was whispering her name. Desire didn't leave. It simply learned to live in silence, heavy, constant, waiting for a moment that could never come. By the end of that week, the house no longer felt like a home, not for me at least. Every wall seemed to whisper reminders of what I couldn't have. Every glance from Sarah was a reminder of what I needed to forget. The silence between us had turned poisonous, and even though no one else seemed to notice, I could feel it. The quiet tension running like an electric current through every meal, every shared room, every breath we took in each other's presence. I told myself I'd stay a few more days, that I could manage it, that I could bury the storm inside me long enough to make it through. But I was lying to myself. Each day was harder than the one before. Each moment near her felt like balancing on the edge of a knife. One wrong move, one careless word, and everything would shatter. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was guilt. The kind that digs deep under your skin, that doesn't let you sleep. I'd look at Ethan and feel something heavy twist in my chest. He'd smile at me, proud, trusting, oblivious. He loved her, and she, despite everything, loved him too, in her own complicated way. That made it worse. I couldn't stay. The decision came quietly, like a whisper in the middle of the night. I woke before dawn, the same way I had that first morning, and I knew. I couldn't spend one more day pretending that nothing was wrong. When I walked out to the porch, the world was still dark. The air was thick with the scent of dew and pine, the kind of silence that feels sacred. I sat there, hands clasped, watching the horizon slowly bloom with light. I wondered if she was awake, if she could feel it too, this unbearable weight pressing down on both of us. I didn't have to wonder long. The door opened behind me, soft as a sigh. She stepped outside, barefoot, wrapped in a loose sweater. Her hair was undone, her face pale in the early light. She looked as if she hadn't slept either. "You're leaving," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Yeah, I think it's time." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world around us was waking, birds calling, the faint rustle of trees in the wind, but it all felt distant, unreal. "Ethan doesn't know?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "I'll tell him after breakfast. I'll say I've got things to take care of back home. Work. Something." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "He'll be disappointed." "I know." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You don't have to go so soon," she said softly. "You could stay another day or two." I looked up then, really looked at her. Her eyes were tired, but beneath that weariness was something raw, unguarded, a plea. And for a moment, I almost gave in. But then I saw Ethan's truck parked in the driveway, the early morning sun reflecting off the hood. I remembered the way he'd hugged me when I arrived, the laughter, the trust, and I knew that staying would destroy all of it. "I can't," I said. My voice cracked on the words. "If I stay, I'll ruin everything." She didn't argue. Instead, she turned her face away, blinking back tears that refused to fall. The silence stretched between us like an open wound. "Do you ever think about that day?" I asked suddenly. "The diner?" She closed her eyes. "Every day." "So do I. I wish I could forget," she whispered. "Maybe leaving will help us both." She nodded, but there was a tremor in her chin that betrayed her calm. "You'll call?" I hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea." "I know," she said, almost smiling, "but I had to ask." We stood there for a long time, not speaking, not moving, just breathing the same air one last time. I wanted to tell her that she'd changed me, that I'd never look at love or loyalty the same way again. But the words felt selfish. They would only make it harder. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're doing the right thing, Jake." "Then why does it feel like I'm running away?" "Because you are," she said. "And sometimes running away is the only way to protect the people you love." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't trying to make me feel better. She was telling me the truth that hurt, but also freed me. I stood, took one last look at her, and nodded. "Goodbye, Sarah." She flinched at the sound of her own name on my lips, then whispered, "Goodbye." I walked past her, through the doorway, the same one she had stood in the day we met again. The same one that had trapped me in a web of desire and guilt. As I stepped through it, I felt something break, not just between us, but inside me. Ethan was still asleep when I left. I left a note on the kitchen table, thanking him for everything, promising to visit again soon. Lies wrapped in politeness. When the taxi pulled away from the house, I looked out the window one last time. She was standing on the porch, arms folded, watching. The morning light framed her like a memory I already knew would haunt me. She didn't wave, neither did I. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty. I told myself that every mile I put between us was a step toward redemption. But the truth was, I didn't feel free. I felt hollow. Guilt doesn't fade with distance. It rides with you. It hides in your chest, in the rearview mirror, in the echo of a voice you'll never hear again. As the town disappeared behind me, I whispered a prayer I wasn't sure anyone would hear. God, help me forget her. But deep down, I knew forgetting wasn't possible. Some people don't leave you. not even when you drive 1,000 miles away. They linger in the spaces between heartbeats, in the silence between breaths. And as the road stretched into the horizon, I realized that escape isn't about leaving a place. It's about learning to live with the parts of yourself you can never outrun. Months passed, but the memory didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. Time didn't heal what had happened in that house. It only made the silence louder. Every night, I'd lie in my apartment in Denver, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the sound of her voice, the warmth of that porch light, the way she said goodbye as if the word itself had broken her heart. I threw myself into work, into anything that could drown the noise. But no matter how far I buried myself in routine, she was there, in flashes, in dreams, in the pauses between one heartbeat and the next. For a while, I convinced myself I was getting better, that the distance had done its job. I went out again, met new people, tried to live as if nothing sacred had been cracked open inside me. But desire has a strange way of hiding beneath the surface, pretending to sleep while it waits for the smallest reminder to wake. That reminder came one cold afternoon in late November. I was at my desk, sorting through invoices, when my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. I smiled as I answered, happy to hear his voice again. "Jake, man, I've been trying to reach you. You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just busy. You know how it is." He laughed. "Always the same. Listen, we've been talking, Sarah, Noah, and I, and we thought we'd come spend Christmas with you this year. What do you think?" The words hit like a punch to the chest. For a second, I couldn't answer. My mouth went dry. "Christmas?" I repeated, my voice thinner than I intended. "Yeah, we haven't been up there in years. We'll drive down, stay for a few days. Noah's been begging to see snow. It'll be great, just like old times." Just like old times. I could hear Sarah in the background, her voice faint but unmistakable. Even through the static, it made something inside me tighten. "Jake?" Ethan said. "You still there?" "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, of course. That sounds great." "Awesome. We'll probably head out the week before Christmas. I'll call you once we set the dates." When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. They were coming here. She was coming here. I leaned back in my chair, pressing a hand to my face, trying to steady myself. But there was no steadying this. Memories I'd tried so hard to bury came flooding back all at once. The diner, the river invitation, her eyes in the doorway, that final morning goodbye. It was as if none of it had ever left me. It had only been waiting for this moment to return. I told myself it would be fine, that enough time had passed, that I could handle it. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. The days leading up to Christmas felt like walking toward a storm you couldn't avoid. I cleaned my apartment twice, trying to distract myself. I decorated a small tree, telling myself it was for Noah. I even bought gifts, simple things, thoughtful things. But no amount of preparation could quiet the dread curling in my stomach. When their car finally pulled into the driveway, I was standing by the window, frozen. The first one out was Noah, running through the snow, laughing. Then Ethan stepped out, waving, calling my name. And then her. Sarah climbed out slowly, her hair tucked under a winter hat, her face pale from the cold. She looked different, older, maybe, or just tired. But the moment our eyes met, all the months between us vanished. The air felt charged, like it had that night on the porch. "Jake!" Ethan shouted, pulling me into a hug. "Man, it's good to see you." I forced a smile. "You too, brother." Sarah approached next, holding Noah's hand. "Merry Christmas, Jake," she said softly. "Merry Christmas," I replied, my voice barely holding steady. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed me a small box wrapped in gold paper. The touch lasted less than a second, but it was enough to undo everything I'd built inside myself. That evening, after dinner, the three of us sat by the fire. Ethan was half asleep on the couch, Noah snoring in a blanket fort beside him. The house was quiet, except for the crackle of burning wood. Sarah sat in the armchair across from me, staring into the flames. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "You didn't think we'd come, did you?" I shook my head. "I hoped you wouldn't." She smiled faintly. "I know." There was no bitterness in her tone, only a kind of tired acceptance. "I tried to forget," she said after a moment. "I really did. But sometimes when Ethan laughs, or when we drive past a coffee shop, it all comes back." I exhaled slowly. "Yeah, me too." We sat there, the firelight flickering across her face, and for a dangerous heartbeat, I thought about what it would mean to cross that line again, to take her hand, to speak the truth out loud. But then I looked at Ethan sleeping peacefully a few feet away and knew I couldn't. "We can't do this," I said finally. "Not again." She nodded, her eyes shining. "I know. But tell me, Jake, do you ever wish things had been different?" Her question hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to lie, to protect us both, but I couldn't. "Every day," I said quietly. She looked down, blinking hard. Then she stood and walked to the window, watching the snow fall outside. When she turned back to me, her face was calm, almost serene. "Then maybe this is our punishment," she said softly. "To remember, but never touch. To love, but never say it." And with that, she went upstairs. I sat there long after she was gone, staring at the dying fire, realizing that temptation doesn't always come to destroy you. Sometimes it comes to remind you how fragile you are. That night, I finally understood what it meant to carry a sin without ever committing it. Because the most dangerous kind of temptation isn't the one that makes you fall. It's the one that makes you wish you could. The morning after that quiet confession by the fire, the world felt different, fragile, as if one wrong word could make it collapse. Snow had fallen through the night, blanketing everything outside in soft white silence. The sky was pale and endless, the kind of morning that makes you believe the world could start over if it wanted to. But I couldn't start over. Not really. Downstairs, I could hear Ethan humming as he made coffee. Noah's laughter echoing through the living room. The sounds of family, ordinary, innocent, unaware of the war that had been raging silently inside their home. I lingered upstairs longer than usual, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older, harder. There was a weariness in my eyes that hadn't been there before, the kind that comes when you've seen yourself too clearly, when you've learned what you're capable of, even if you never act on it. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Ethan grinned at me, holding out a mug. "Morning, sleepyhead. You missed the sunrise. It was beautiful." I forced a smile and took the cup. Guess I needed the rest. Sarah was at the stove, flipping pancakes, her back to me. She didn't turn around, but I felt her presence like a pulse. Steady, careful, distant. I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window above the sink. Calm face, composed smile. No trace of the woman who had whispered, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. Breakfast passed in easy conversation. Ethan teasing Noah about eating too fast, Sarah laughing softly, me pretending I wasn't counting the seconds until I could leave the table. It was a cruel kind of peace, the kind that demanded too much pretending. After we finished, Ethan clapped his hands together. "Hey, Jake, I was thinking, maybe we could take Noah sledding this afternoon. You up for it?" Sure, I said automatically. Sarah looked up, her expression unreadable. That sounds nice. For a moment, our eyes met. It was nothing, just a flicker. But inside that glance was everything we couldn't say. We're fine. We're pretending. Don't let him see. The hours that followed were filled with snow and laughter. Ethan's joy was infectious, the kind of pure happiness I hadn't seen in years. Watching him chase Noah down the hill, his breath clouding in the cold air, I remembered who we used to be. Two brothers, inseparable, innocent, loyal to the core. And it hit me then, how close I had come to destroying that. Not with action, but with thought, with desire, with silence. When we got back to the cabin that evening, Ethan built a fire while Sarah made cocoa. The air smelled of pine and cinnamon. For a while, it felt almost normal again, as if the world had forgiven us. But forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't come so easily. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the dying fire. The room was quiet, the shadows long and soft. My chest ached with something I couldn't name, a mix of relief and loss. And then I heard it, footsteps on the stairs. Sarah appeared at the bottom step, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose over her shoulders. Her face was pale in the dim light. I couldn't sleep, she said softly. Me neither, I admitted. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the firelight dancing between us. It wasn't like before. There was no hunger this time, no pull, just sadness. I wanted to thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not saying anything, for leaving when you did, for protecting him and me. I swallowed hard. It wasn't heroism, it was survival. She smiled faintly. Maybe both. The silence between us was heavy but clean. Not the dangerous kind that hides secrets, but the kind that acknowledges them. I've thought about that week, she said after a while, about what almost happened, about how easy it would have been to cross that line. So have I said. And? I looked at her, my voice low. And I think what we didn't do means more than anything we could have. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. The sin that never happened, she whispered. The phrase lingered in the air, fragile and final. We stood there for a few more seconds, two people bound by a secret that had no witnesses, no proof, no scars, but the invisible ones. Take care of him, I said. I will. And of yourself. She smiled. A real smile this time, faint but honest. Goodbye, Jake. I wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. So I just nodded and turned away, leaving her standing by the fire, her shadow trembling against the wall. The next morning, I helped them pack. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, melting as they touched the ground. Ethan hugged me tight, clapping me on the back. Thanks for having us, brother, he said. This was perfect. We should do it every year. I smiled, though I knew we wouldn't. Yeah, every year. When they drove away, I watched the car until it disappeared down the road. Then the silence returned, vast, pure, and merciless. Inside, the house felt hollow. I walked to the window, looking out at the untouched snow, and thought about how thin the line had been, between right and wrong, between loyalty and desire, between love and ruin. Nothing had happened, not really. There were no confessions, no betrayals, no proof. But something had happened all the same. Because sin doesn't always need a witness. Sometimes it just needs a heart willing to carry it. I poured myself a cup of cold coffee, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall. Each flake melted before it touched the earth, vanishing as if it had never existed. And maybe that's what we were. A story erased before it could be written. A sin that never happened, but never stopped existing either. As the world outside turned white, I whispered to the silence, "Let this be enough." But in the deepest part of me, I knew. Some memories don't ask for forgiveness. They just ask to be remembered quietly, like a prayer that was never meant to be spoken aloud. A man visits his brother after years apart, only to fall for a mysterious woman, only to discover she's his brother's wife. A story of forbidden desire, guilt, and the haunting weight of a sin that never happened.